Well, good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Our guest today is Ralph Czerwinski, and Ralph wanted to share with us a story about change in perspective in his life, I guess, in terms of growing up with one focus of life and things, and then having an opportunity to stretch his thinking out past those initial boundaries. So, Ralph, you indicated that you'd grown up in a rather isolated provincial environment.
Okay. Well, it was in the on a Clay Hills farm down in southern Illinois, and when I was quite young, first years, my folks had been burned out. They had a house burned down, and they moved a house, abandoned house, from a neighboring farm that was no longer used, and they made it into a house. No electricity, no plumbing. I didn't have those things until I was probably 10, 11 years old. Then they built a house, more prosperous times, and we then had electricity and so forth. I went to a one-room schoolhouse, 2-mile walk against the wind, uphill, in the rain, both ways, and all 8 grades were in one room. So that was first and second grade. And then my third grade, I went to parochial school from third through sixth grade, and that was a 2-room schoolhouse. So not very many students either place. And then I went to public school, 7th and 8th grade, and they actually had our own room for each grade then. High school was 125 students total. It was a Polish farmers community. And so the social life was centered around the church, and I was a small church, and the Polish culture, which, in a way, the families were still acclimating to America. And and when I was really small, the priest would do half of the sermon in Polish, and then he would do the other half in English. So there was a lot of still looking back to the culture of the old country.
So you graduated from high school, and what was your plan at that point?
I was a really good student, as relative to being 25 students in the class. I was on top, and I began to get various hints that I didn't know the word at the time, but I was a nerd. And so I enjoyed studying. I did well in my courses. I enjoyed the favor of the teachers. And it was different. It was different in a lot of ways. I didn't do well in sports. I didn't really have any close friends my age, because I didn't seem to think quite the way they did, I guess. I'm not sure exactly why. And I was isolated. It was miles away to get to somebody else my age during the summer on the farm. And there was always farm work to do. So it began to show me. My folks were supportive and thinking of me going to college. My teachers encouraged it. I looked around and I didn't really see anything else I wanted to do. So I guess I didn't have the practical or mindset that was ready to be practical and look at what people around me do. I had an older brother. He was going to get the farm, so that kind of ruled that out. Yeah. And another factor, actually, that I think was really important was that my dad, along the line, had gotten a job as a rural mail carrier. So he wasn't a farmer. He did both jobs, but he wasn't a farmer alone then. And it gave us a steady income. And the people around would tell Dad, "Yeah, you got one of those government jobs, And right. So we were probably relative to the community, kind of upper middle class then. And that made it more realistic to think about doing something like going to more school, going to college, rather than hunkering down and staying on the farm and helping out, you know.
So when do you feel like it began to really get a broader sense of life in the world, and kind of beginning to break out of
Yeah.
that restrictive view?
Well, I remember a Greek history course and a philosophy course that really made an impression on me at the time. Greek history, because actually a lot of my thought about history was from parochial school, and it was then from the Catholic Church perspective, which I found, well, no, really there was another, a lot of other sides, a lot of other ways to look at history. And it also resonated with me because I was interested in math, and I was finding that the way the ancient Greeks thought about math was very intriguing, because they insisted on treating math as a system, and if you wanted to find out new things about it, you had to have a basic set of assumptions or axioms, and then anything that you wanted to claim was true had to be provable by logical thought based upon those axioms. And this is already an abstractness that began to intrigue me. The philosophy course was, I don't know, 10 or 12 different Western philosophers, and we studied them. And that was where I first saw that you could have, I guess you'd say, deep thinking about matters that weren't necessarily practical. And so that also intrigued me and gave me I think a broader sense of the world and perspective on the world.
So as you began to look at things a little bit differently and think a little bit differently, how did that put you with your family? I mean, because obviously their focus and the one you grew up with, that's kind of still the operating mode at home.
Yeah.
But now you're looking at things through kind of a different lens.
Yeah. Well, my dad didn't understand why anybody needed to go to so much school. Neither my father or mother graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. They came, they were on a farm. They came to adulthood during the Depression, and so you had to be a hard worker in order to make it in that setting. And so that was the life that they knew. But my mom used to tell the story sometimes, I think when she was a little bit peeved at Dad. She'd say, well, my side of the family, our ancestors back in Poland were szlachta, and the Polish word for, you could translate it as kind of minor nobility, upper middle, maybe the mayor of a village or something like that. It was a little bit more than a peasant, which is what she would say Dad's side of the family came from, were peasants. So she already had this a basic underlying feeling that it wasn't a bad idea to go and get learning in something or another. And so that was their reaction. I have an older brother. He tried to go to college but dropped out after a couple of terms, and unfortunately I think it was part of the reason why he and I grew apart, because he, I think, resented the fact that I was successful at it and he hadn't been. Mm-hmm. He's very smart, probably in a lot of ways smarter than me, but he just, for a lot of reasons, wasn't able to make it through that regime. And then I have a younger sister, quite a bit younger, 9 years to the day, and she wound up doing a business course kind of thing, which was essentially learning bookkeeping, secretarial work, that kind of thing. So none of them ever really completely understood what I was doing. Well, I kind of, got into this studying thing, and I found that after an initial kind of rough start in college, because I didn't have very much background, I had a year and a half of math in high school, and I was trying to be a math major, so
Wow.
I had to do some catching up.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did finally get into it, and I was doing well in school. And I had this professor, Professor Schultz, who taught an upper level course in algebraic structures. And I'd had all, the calculus and real analysis and all those kinds of things. But this was really something different, and it was a very abstract branch of mathematics. And you essentially deal with sets of objects that have operations on them. You assume some things about the operations and see what you can do, what you can get as a result from that. Anyway, I wasn't going to do any kind of engineering or accounting with that background, and that's what I was really interested in, it seemed. So graduate school was the way to go. And even though it was tough, because I was married and had a young family, and to support them while you're in graduate school is not real easy, but
No.
that's where it went.
Yeah.
I got a PhD in University of Iowa in abstract algebra, and
I can see your dad looking up.
my first job was at the University of Georgia in 1969. I mean, first other than graduate student
Right,
teaching,
yeah.
that kind of thing. And Dad says, $10,000? That's all you're making after all that schooling? And so Mom didn't understand either, but she was still supportive.
Where, at about what age do you think that your thinking really sort of cast off the remnants of your provincial background, and where you felt like, okay, yeah, now I really have a kind of different way of thinking now. But
Yeah. Well, as I said, I started to have that feeling that I was what we'd call now a nerd when I was even back in high school. And so there were, signs of it, I guess, along the way. I didn't choose to do something that everybody around me, my peers, were doing in that community, mostly staying in that community. It felt too close, too restrictive. And then the college experience opened up the world and made me think, well, there's other ways to do things. And I think I became a lot more independent. Actually, college was a very formative time, and I became independent in my thinking then. I decided, well, I want to do things that aren't the norm.
Right.
And so I'm going to have to deal with people not understanding what I'm doing, and maybe even criticizing what I'm doing, but that I feel strongly enough about it that I want to do it.
Sure.
And so that laid the foundation. I think that's a way I felt throughout the rest of my life. I still feel that way. It's kind of interesting that we always say in mathematical research that whether it's immediately applicable or not, there are branches of mathematics that are immediately applicable to the real world. Others are more futuristic, and
Right.
they may be applicable someday, they may not. And if you're an abstract mathematician, you don't really care. You're just worried about getting the results and understanding the structures that you're dealing with. But then it turns out that there are things in algebraic structures that are used to model quantum mechanics now, for instance. And so you never know when something will pay off in that application direction.
Appreciate you taking the time to share with us the sort of life growth experience transition that you've gone through. Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah, thank you.